Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Thanks for joining for this very special live webinar. I'm Arjun Jamnadas, and I'll be your host and guiding the discussion today. So if you are as keen as we are at AgilePoint about innovation, automation, and digital transformation, you're definitely in the right place. And we've got a fantastic lineup for you today. So we've got Jeffrey Yozwiak, who's an esteemed TEI consultant at Forrester. And he's the author of the Total Economic Impact Report that we're going to be diving into today. He's been doing a bit of digging into some of our customers, and I'm sure he can't wait to share his findings with us. Also joining us, someone who needs no introduction, but I'll give him one anyway, Jesse Shear, co-founder of AgilePoint. He's lived and breathed AgilePoint since day one, and he's here to tell us and share some fascinating perspectives on the journey that he's been on and the philosophy behind AgilePoint. So today, we're not just going to be presenting to you. This is going to be an immersive discussion, so feel free to interject and chat with us and ask your questions. Of course, there will be a separate Q&A at the end of the session, so you can raise any questions you have there. Now, before I forget, you can actually get this Total Economic Impact Report yourself. So there will be a QR code turning up somewhere up there shortly, I believe. There it is, right, almost on cue. So you can just scan that and it will take you straight to the report. You can download that. Of course, you'll be able to get that through our website as well. So without much further ado and without further introduction, let me hand it over to Jesse to kick things off.
Thank you, Arjun, and welcome, Jeffrey, and welcome everyone. We are very excited, as Arjun said, very excited to have Jeffrey from Forrester to share a study they have conducted with 4 of AgilePoint customers, including one of the first AgilePoint customers. And what I would like to do is take a couple minutes to highlight a couple very key characteristics of AgilePoint platform, and so that when Jeffrey goes through the benefits, you are able to better relate how those benefits was able to be derived. Okay, so with that, let me go to my next slide here. So as you can see, there's 4 customers that was participating in this study. They are all global enterprise, and you can briefly see the customer number 1 is in the defense industry, and customer 2 is in engineering and professional services, and customer 3 is in nonprofit, and customer 4 is in media. And you can notice that customer number 1 in 2007 is one of our first customer from EMEA. Oh, sorry. So this is actually the benefit summary that Jeffrey will be going through. And as you can see that in this case, I mean, the benefit is being divided into different categories. And this is actually the first category is where our customers reported that they use AgilePoint to do simple process automation and orchestration, such as task automation, functional workflows. And to be honest, right, to a lot of organizations, their automation, many today are still about task and workflow automation today. But I think what is really the most interesting from this study, what we have learned is that this customer reported the benefits, more than 85% were actually related to the end-to-end cross-functional complex process automation. And this is actually very, very interesting and insightful. And I think Jeff will share more details. But what I would like to do is, as a matter of fact, we talked to a lot of digital transformation leaders, and many of them are telling us their digital transformation initiatives are not going well. And a couple of things they cited, and they said they actually identified that end-to-end cross-functional applications are the most lacking, because they really, as part of transformation, they really need to bridge the silos. At the same time, they do attempt to implement this end-to-end cross-functional applications automation, and they say many times it takes a long time very costly, and it resulted in larger technical debt. So this is preventing them from being able to achieve that cross-functional at scale. And so in this regard, I'd like to just kind of share just a couple key characteristics of AgilePoint platform, that how we were able to empower, enable this customer to deliver the complex cross-functional automation that has been cited to be the most lacking. As we can see that a lot of organizations taking automation, and when we think about automations, first thing is think about efficiency, right? So it doesn't matter if it's workflow automation, or even today, a lot of organizations deploy a lot of RPA task automation in a lot of different corners in the company. But that delivers efficiency. But however, what we have learned is that today, with digital transformation and also post the pandemic era, if we deliver automation now, that needs to be able to deliver both efficiency and transformation. And the transformation may have a lot to do with improving customer experience, improving the workplace, the employee experience. And those experiences are really involved in the journey, right? And that's why the end-to-end cross-functional becomes very important. So let's talk about what we have learned, right? We talked to a lot of digital transformation leaders, and they're telling us about the cross-functional, the current state. And very interesting, right? We see a couple just, different scenarios. The first one here is they say they do, almost everybody have deployed some type of automation at a different departmental or functional area, or different using RPA to automate some tasks at different corners. But when it comes to cross-functional, they still rely on emails and sharing documents, right? So in this case here, you're not getting efficiency, you're not getting transformation. And if let's take a look at the scenario number 2 that we have heard as well. And many times they try to use a different workflow tools or BPMs, or even do hand coding, or to try to create a cross-functional. And they say many times it resulted in tremendous technical debt, and make it very difficult to continuously maintain and improve, and also very difficult to bring business to take part in implementing and improving this cross-functional. So in this case here, again, yes, we may gain efficiency, but we're still gonna lack the transformation. And the third is very interesting, and many times we also see the digital transformation leaders share that they use the different integration platforms, right, to make sure that the data are being orchestrated and through different systems. Okay, so in a way, they kind of accomplish the sense of automation, as sometimes it's cross-functional, but they all mention one thing. They say the challenge we face is that our users still don't like to have to log into different systems. So in a way, yes, we kind of accomplish some sense of efficiency and automation, but again, it's lacking that transformation to improve the experience. So finally, right, and we also seeing a lot of organizations say they actually replace some of the human FTE workers, right, with RPA. Right, yes, you may be able to further improve the efficiency with some task automation, but it's still not achieving that, right? So in a way, let's talk about why our customers, even including a customer adopting AgilePoint as early as 2007, they have been able to deploy the cross-functional at scale. So firstly, we identify that if you're only doing functional automation, RPA automation, you are really only achieving digital optimization according to the term definition of Gartner, right? So digital transformation is key to be able to get to be able to, you need to create and deploy this cross-functional at scale. And we believe the only way to get there is to enable the collaborative development between IT and business, right? So in this case here, the business uses the subject matter expert we referring to as citizen developers, and by need to be able to do that at the enterprise scale and level, right? So we started to talk about how do we do that from the AgilePoint platform characteristics. So we believe first thing you need to do is we got to reduce the complexity. If we're gonna involve business, right, we got to reduce complexity. And the complexity has a lot to do with when we do the traditional development, right? There's a lot of very complex process, right? So we see there are three key enablers, right, to make that possible. The first thing is we have to create a platform or solutions or whatever, automation solutions, very software engineering minded. So in a way, that's how AgilePoint was creating the solution with the next generation local no-code since 2003. And one of the key differentiation there, we do not generate code to reduce the complexity. And the secondly was that's how we can really enable business to participate. Okay, by doing that, without code generation, it dramatically reduces the technical understanding they need to know in order to be able to create application that are quality deliveries. And then the third is the architecture is enable a very fast composition. So it's a composable architecture to enable business to leverage the different IT asset without having to, bog down to that detailed technical complexity. So just kind of quickly, this is just a visual, right? Kind of showing a lot of what we do today. Doesn't matter we do just a straight development or using different workflow or BPM or local tool. Many times is turning the intent into code generation, right? Into code. So in this case here, yes, you get a speed. You also get the efficiency, but at the expense that you're going to accumulate technical debt really, really fast. It does not reduce the complexity, right? So in a way, so when the AgilePoint paradigm, in order to reduce the complexity, so firstly, so the software engineering minded enable us to create architecture, right? So firstly, there's a metadata abstraction framework, so you can take your any API from any systems, so be able to go through this abstraction. So you set it loosely coupled from your in current systems, or including your custom development. Now you're able to abstract to become a metadata enabled, abstract the business activities, and that will be done by IT or professional developers. And after that, now that's when the composition can happen. But the key here is once you've done the composition, this could be a task automation, could be a workflow automation, could be a cross-functional automation. And this composition never get turned into code, right? You drive the model-driven execution directly. And this is how you really be able to create a lot more automation, and you would not increase the technical debt. You would, because it dramatically also reduce the complexity to empower the system developers. Okay, so this is just kind of quick. This composition we talked about here is not about just simple application of simple automation. We did talk about the full stack composition from UI, logic, and data, right? So you do full stack composition, and then this will go to execution directly. So when we're talking about empower system developers, and also be able to do that at scale and safely, we cannot now talking about how do you govern that, right? So the almost 15 to 16 years of innovation since 2003, when we are doing the in this local no-code innovation, that also give us a time to really develop a layered governance framework. Okay, so that and why this is so important, right? So one of the Fortune 100 customers was able to create 2,000 automation applications to replace 8,000 the legacy ones they created in 15 years. And the 2,000 automations created in AgilePoint covers more than 1,000 different use cases, right? Different use cases, you can empower system developer to do it. You need different permutation and combination of permissions, and this is what this layer governance framework will enable you to get that. Okay, so finally, I just kind of we talked about what is important today. If we're gonna deliver automation for digital transformation, we need to think about not just deliver efficiency, but also transformation. So I'm gonna use this is actually one of the 4 customers in the study. Okay, this is a customer that adopted AgilePoint since 2007. And as you can see that they run their operation, it was more than 50 global subsidiaries. So you say this is headquartered, those are all the different subsidiaries. So not only achieve cross-functional, they actually also achieve end-to-end processes cut across different subsidiaries and headquarters, right? And in this case here, this is an example of how much they are able to be able to deliver efficiency for a complex business process, right? But at the same time, this is to do with efficiency, but they also achieve transformation. So for example, in this case here, this process may be needed by any subsidiary, but instead of creating different versions, they have actually one version of this purchase order process solutions can dynamically adapt when it's being triggered by different subsidiaries. So instead of maintaining 50 different versions, now they only have one version that's dynamic, right? So this is when we talk about, the transformation part of it. So with that, I know that many are thinking about those are all large global enterprise customers. Would this solution also work for some, if you are mid-size or even smaller? The answer is absolutely yes, because we structure a licensing model is also to fit digital transformation, because digital transformation is not for one department only, it's for the whole company. But you still need to start small, right? So almost every of our customers start with this concurrency-based licensing. So you can, doesn't matter how many users you have, you can actually get started with a small set of concurrent user seats, and everybody can participate and be able to do, to create. And then once you created more application, you deliver value, that's why you can scale. So with that, I'm gonna turn this over to Jeff now. And Jeff will share more details of the study. Thank you.
Thanks, Jesse.
I think
I am unable to advance my slides. There we go. So welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining this presentation. My name is Jeffrey Yozwiak. I'm a consultant with Forrester's Total Economic Impact practice, and today I'm going to be presenting the results of our research into the total economic impact of AgilePoint. My agenda here is to first give some background and context for a TEI study and give you an overview of our methodology, where our data came from. Then I'll talk about the specific customers and go into depth about how they informed our analysis. And then finally, going to wrap up and spend the majority of my presentation talking about the results of the research itself. At Forrester, we really understand that technology investment decisions are becoming increasingly complex. So we developed a proprietary methodology to help leaders make decisions about their technology investments. The total economic impact, or TEI analyses, go beyond simple total cost of ownership or ROI analyses by also quantifying and considering variability in outcomes, as well as the long-run strategic value of an investment. So I want to describe this approach in a little bit more detail now, so you have some more background. The TEI analyses have 4 pillars. We first quantify the business benefits and costs that customers have experienced when using a technology. And then we analyze the potential value that that technology can have into the future. That's what we call flexibility. And then, to be on the conservative side, we adjust all of the numbers to account for uncertainty and risk in the calculations. These projects are can often take months or even up to a year. This one was one of our more thorough analyses. We first begin the projects by doing due diligence, during which we speak with experts about the technology. This includes both our analysts as well as the people at AgilePoint who are in the weeds and building the technology itself. Then we gather our data for our studies by interviewing customers who are using the technology. And this is really the hallmark of TEI's approach. These interviews are just between the consultant and the customer. They're confidential, the customers are anonymized, and AgilePoint doesn't participate in them. So by having this approach for our interviews, we really get unbiased, unvarnished information because the customers are able to speak to their experience and really speak their minds and tell us the full story of their experiences. Based on the data, the quantitative and qualitative data that we gather during those interviews, we model a typical or representative organization's experience with the technology. And that financial model allows us to calculate an ROI. Then we document everything in a full, complete report and case study. And in that case study document, we try to be as transparent as possible and really walk readers through all of the calculations and all of our conclusions so that they can apply that framework to their own decision making. So for this particular study, I want to move into describing where the data came from. And I'm just going to start by the firmographics of the customers we interviewed and the challenges that they were facing when they decide to invest in AgilePoint. Justy already hinted that mentioned that a lot of the customers had been using AgilePoint for an exceptionally long time. We ended up speaking with 9 different decision makers at 4 different organizations, and there were really 3 points that stood out to us in the firmographics of these organizations and how they had implemented AgilePoint. The first was that they had often been using AgilePoint for a very exceptionally long time, which was fantastic for our purposes because we had such rich sources of data. The other thing that stood out to us as we were working with these customers was that the teams that were using AgilePoint were relatively small for the scale of implementations that they had. At all of these organizations, AgilePoint was really powering business critical applications and was serving hundreds of users on the business side. These organizations had 2 key challenges that led them to adopt AgilePoint. And really in short, the legacy or traditional ways of developing applications were just too slow and expensive. For one aspect of that, you can think about how quickly business and technology landscapes change, and then also contrast that with how long it might take to design and develop new applications and automate new processes in traditional ways. And the older paradigms just couldn't keep up. These organizations also found that other solutions or options that they had for automating processes were cost prohibitive. And that could have been either due to onerous licensing fees or the skills and the resources and the time needed to use those platforms. So at a minimum, these organizations wanted to automate processes with AgilePoint and gain the usual efficiencies that we might expect from process automation: time savings, error prevention, efficiencies. But for these organizations, a particular focus was on the most complicated and business critical processes. And you can remember from a few slides ago, one of the organizations was in the defense industry and other provide engineering services. These were organizations that had very sophisticated workflows and operations that they couldn't risk errors in. Their long-term goals were to gain that digital transformation and modernization, but they wanted to do this cost effectively and at scale. And they were looking for a solution that would support their transformation well into the future. To analyze the actual financial impact of adopting AgilePoint, we created and modeled a hypothetical composite organization using firmographics that were similar to those of the organizations we spoke to, of the customer organizations we spoke to. And then we modeled the benefits and the costs of adopting AgilePoint for this organization using scaled metrics and the quantitative data that the interviewees reported to us. We also Crucial to understanding this is that the interviewees used AgilePoint to automate two different types of processes. The first were simple processes that were just basic workflows or tasks, but they also used AgilePoint to develop and automate more complex processes. These are sophisticated applications, end-to-end workflows with users in multiple functions and business units, cross-functional, and really operations that are critical to the businesses. The interviewees said that simple processes could be built in about 2 to 3 weeks, and complex processes could be built in about 8 to 9 weeks. And that is going from design to developing to testing and then deploying to production, the full life cycle. We also heard, though, that the complex processes that they were working on were significantly more complex than simple processes. On average, they had 7 times as many steps, as many users, and instances per year. Our financial model assumes that the organization automates and develops processes using a small team of about 8 to 16 people who are fully dedicated to digital transformation. And this team is a mix of professional developers and citizen developers, as well as folks who are business specialists. By splitting its time evenly between developing simple and complex processes, the team, by the end of the 3 years in our model, builds 80 simple processes and 21 complex processes, and ends up realizing and moving towards that organization-wide digital transformation. And by the end of those 3 years, you have processes and automations that are used by the majority of employees at the organization. So we found that this transformation and these initiatives, this effort, this deployment of AgilePoint had the following results. I'm going to talk about the benefits first, and then I'll move into the costs that we quantified. We found 5 different categories of benefits that we were able to quantify, and you can see the distribution of benefits in comparison to the total here on the right. The first and second benefits were simple and complex process efficiencies. So these are things like automation saving time for employees and for users on the business side. The third category of benefits that we heard was related to process quality, especially for complex processes. Automation reduces the risk of errors in business critical operations, and it provides newfound visibility into complex processes that can enable even further improvements. We also heard about process adaptability in terms of the automations, the applications that were developed with AgilePoint were exceptionally long-lived because they could be updated so easily and changed as business and technical requirements at the organization changed over many years. This meant less maintenance work by IT and less technical debt. It was a source of savings for the customers. And then lastly, looking forward towards the future, being able to rapidly develop and automate processes unlock new business opportunities for many of the customers. The full details of these calculations are in the case study that Arjun mentioned at the top of the presentation, but I want to go into just a few specific highlights and details behind what we found. The first really surprising or notable result was that the majority of the business benefits to the composite organization came from automating those complex processes, even though the composite organization had developed 4 times more simple processes than complex processes. And this makes sense if you remember that the complex processes are sophisticated, business critical, touching multiple business units, having an order of magnitude more users. Automating simple processes and basic tasks and workflows is fine. That absolutely had a benefit. But really, the real benefit and the power of AgilePoint came from automating the most important and complex processes. It was just orders of magnitude more impactful. A further benefit from working on these complex processes was that the customers often, until they had automated the processes, didn't have analytics or reporting or visibility into the processes until they went with AgilePoint and automated them. And that ended up enabling further efficiencies and improvements in those sophisticated processes overall, or over the long term. One of the interviewees told us, it's really the visibility of the processes. For many of our end users, it is very important to not just automate a process, but to analyze it afterwards and see the bottlenecks. So process automation absolutely saves time. It can reduce the errors and the risk of those in business critical processes. And then long term, the visibility into processes that are so multi-step, touching so many different business units and so integral to an organization, enables further improvements and ultimately getting towards that organization-wide digital transformation. The second really notable result that we found in our study was that the AgilePoint applications remained in use and were generating value for the business for surprisingly long amounts of time. In many instances, often a decade or more. So Jesse talked about one customer in the defense industry that had adopted AgilePoint in 2007. We heard from them that some of their original processes, the first automations that they built, were still in use, not in the original form, but rather they had been adapted and changed and updated as the business continued to grow and change over so many years. The strength of AgilePoint that customers report to us is that it was so easy to update and change processes as the requirements changed over time. As the business needs changed, or maybe the technical landscape, the systems that the processes had to connect and integrate with changed over time. So for us, we quantified this in our model as pure time savings for the digital transformation team. But that likely underestimates the true value of this benefit, because what we found was that the IT team, the digital transformation team, was spending significantly less time keeping applications current and useful to the business and valuable to the business. But a source of potentially further research might be to look into and quantify the benefits of avoiding technical debt, avoiding having to refactor. And there are also other costs too that would be part of this benefit, but were not included in the model, such as search costs whenever you're changing systems, all of those kind of change management costs that go on when you have a deployment for a decade or more. So the other benefits impact business operations and revenue. And this one feels relatively small if you look at the entire pie, but it's really unique for this study. And it's strategic. This is something that organizations should consider as they're looking toward their future investment. And it suggests that organizations may want to think beyond just those table stakes of efficiency and time savings, and go further and look at how their investment and their IT investments will play out over the long run. Will they continue to be adaptable? Will the organization be able to update and change applications? And will those applications and those automations further the organization-wide initiatives over the very long run? Our third really notable finding on the benefit side was that being able to develop and deploy processes so rapidly unlocked new business opportunities, new sources of revenue for the organizations and the customer organizations. So these might be as simple as new projects, or they could be market conditions that organizations were able to take advantage of because their IT and process automation was so fast and so rapid, and they could fill that need that they saw in the market so quickly. One interviewee said that when their organization bids on projects, they present their automation capabilities and they win new projects, new business because of automation. AgilePoint is a very known platform. People trust it as an environment. A fourth notable finding on the benefit side of our research that we explored but was a qualitative but did not quantify in the model was the benefits of citizen development. So citizen developers can build, with AgilePoint, citizen developers can build and contribute to process automation and application development even without having traditional programming backgrounds. One of the interviewees who was a citizen developer said, deploying AgilePoint was definitely the best business decision that we could have made. I love how empowering it is to people such as myself who are hybrid users between business and tech. There's an added benefit in terms of quality because business users who are so close to the business requirements for an automation are able to enact and build solutions with less communication overhead. They're just they're empowered. Long run, citizen development has the potential to reduce development costs and also increase development speeds because the organizations can tap a wider range of people. Development and automation is democratized, and more folks can contribute to organization-wide process automation initiatives. I just wanted to reiterate what one of the interviewees who was a citizen developer at their organization said. This interviewee reported the downtime has been almost zero on the AgilePoint side. They're very much aware of making sure their product is accessible around the globe at any given time. And as we've seen, countries change their rules and regulations. So again, speaking to that need to continually adapt and update processes as business requirements change. The interviewee went on to say, again, we can rely on AgilePoint. We have just been extremely happy. So I spoke to the benefits side of our analysis, but any investment also has in a technology also has associated costs. And that's what I want to cover now. We heard 3 different categories of costs associated with investing in AgilePoint. There is first the licensing costs, and the dynamic concurrent user licensing that AgilePoint offers was, according to the interviewees, very cost effective for them. It allowed them to scale up their usage and get started really easily, and then scale up their implementation as their needs grew and their investments grew over time. The biggest investment is likely the effort and the initiative that organizations might spend in automate the actual time spent automating processes and the resources dedicated to it. Again, we modeled a fairly small team and found that the teams that the customers were using to support process automation with AgilePoint were surprisingly small. But it's an additional cost consideration for folks considering this investment. And then lastly, those development resources or the digital transformation team in-house can be supplemented by professional services expertise from AgilePoint or from third parties. So when we took all of the benefits and the costs into consideration, we calculated a 416% return on investment from those costs incurred. And for the organization, this investment was worth over 26 million in present value benefits. I think the cash flow analysis on the right is really illustrative of the trajectory of the organizations that and the customer organizations that we spoke to, because you can see how the benefits ramp up over time as the organization becomes more agile and as AgilePoint is really deployed and adopted and used more widely. You get that organization-wide transformation, and that's where the huge potential of the technology comes into play. So I just want to sum up with this quote that from one of the customers that really spoke to was a really good testament to the value that AgilePoint was providing their organization. The interviewee said, "In my entire IT and business experience, I think AgilePoint was one of the best decisions that our organization ever made. And if I were to work with any other organization, I would always start with number one, we need to set up AgilePoint to get work done." Thank you, and I'll turn back over to you, Arjun.
Jeffrey, thank you. That was read the report, but I still find it incredibly fascinating. So, of course, we open the floor up to any questions. I do have a couple of questions that I'd probably like to direct to you, Jeffrey, at first. Really, so I've downloaded the report. I've heard you talk about it. I'm intrigued. Now, how would I take this to my organization? How do I use this to create the case for doing something in my organization?
So,
how will I leverage this?
Yeah, great question. So the TEI report itself is intended to present a framework for thinking about the sources of business value for an organization. It does provide that kind of authoritative case if folks are interested in presenting things up the chain. But what we really hope readers of the study and the research take away is that they results and the framework that we present, the model that we developed by using the data from customers who are really getting these benefits can be a starting point for them to start thinking about and customizing that model to make and develop their own custom business cases. We tried to almost give a jumping off point based on what historical customers have realized, and hope that can get folks to start thinking about the future potential and using some of the metrics for their own business cases and their own purposes as they think about the specific applications at their organizations.
Great. Now, in the report, I think a central theme of this is that a lot of the figures and facts are centered around or built around this notion of a composite organization, which you gave some stats around it. A 5 billion revenue, 20K employees. Now, let's say I have a company size that is vastly different to that. How transposable are the findings in this report to my organization if I was bigger or even smaller, or dramatically smaller for that matter?
Yeah, that is a really good question, and I think it's something that we want to make sure is not lost. So the results themselves scale up and down to the size of the organization really well. We had enough representative organizations and we heard about their experiences at different stages. For example, there was a nonprofit in the organization that was getting those benefits, even though they were at a smaller scale than the other um, multinational companies. And then on the flip side, the results can just continue and implementations can continue to scale up. The model in the full study shows the trajectory for how AgilePoint adoption can really spread throughout an organization. So even those smaller organizations that are considering discrete implementations would still realize that value no matter the scale. But as you really adopt it and automate, as you really adopt it more, the benefits and the transformative benefits really become apparent. So I hope that answers your question. It scales up and down. The ROI is not a metric that's it's a scalable metric.
So yeah, no, and I think it's implicit in the report as well, right? The benefits you talk about are things you can implement regardless of the size of the company, whether it's a complex business critical process, right? Or it's gaining that transparency and visibility of your processes and the kind of knock-on effects that has, and the ability to adapt these processes to seize time-sensitive opportunities in the market. I mean, those benefits are absolutely clear. And of course, you've hit on something that I keep gawking on, actually. It's that 416% ROI. I mean, you don't typically see such a sizable percentage. And in fact, yeah, I had to actually say that this is not a typo. This is actually 416%. But taken in isolation, yes, it's a big number. But how prevalent is something like that in certainly when in conducting TEI reports? 416 ROI seems rather substantial.
Well, the TEI reports, we really try not to compare them to each other because they're case studies. So we want to represent the experiences of the customers that participate in the study as best as we possibly can. That said, there is really no question that the technology is providing extremely substantial value for the interviewed participants. It's a very significant return on their investments. And also, I think that that's partly the strength of what AgilePoint does as a technology, both in terms of just the basic benefits that we started off with, the simple process automation, but then really the larger impact that the technology can have on an organization.
That's a fair response. Okay. There is a question actually in the chat. Sharjeel asks, and perhaps Jesse, this is probably one for you. What are 2 or 3 factors that differentiate AgilePoint the most from other process automation and application dev platforms?
Okay. And I think in one of the slides, I highlighted, I believe, right, part of democratizing software development, we must reduce the complexity, right? I think it's been reflected in a number of different ways, right? And in a way, the current coding process, right? Doesn't matter we do hand coding or doesn't matter we have tool that are generating code for us. It kind of speed up the current method, but it doesn't really change the paradigm, right? So the inherent complexity and everything is still there. And that's actually, so from a couple of different perspectives, right? If we, even today we think about, we want to empower system developers, right? Without simplifying, without reducing complexity, right? That cannot be sustainable, right? that won't be able to, or you might be able to get system development working in different work groups, right, in different corners and different projects, but you cannot take it to scale, right, safely, right. But that's one aspect of that, and that's why I think what we're saying is, firstly, we really got to simplify the complexity, and thankfully, right, that's when we started out our local no-code innovation in 2003. Our aspiration was not about, hey, let's get a code out faster, right? Our drivers was, how can we reduce the complexity so that it can deliver a higher business agility, right? I think Jeff mentioned about in the earlier that he cited that a lot of customers mentioned about how easy, right, you are able to continuously adapt the processes, right? In about 30 years, if we hear anybody talk about continuous improvement, right, the next to it is process. But anything implemented, right, your business process eventually when it runs is actually a code-enabled compiled code. You're just not gonna get that, right? Because it's gonna be, you're gonna have to deal with that complexity. I think and that reflected in that, and also I think reflected in what Jeff highlighted, that surprisingly, right, he found the customers have to develop and maintain this super business critical end-to-end complex processes, and it's a small team, right? And I think that also reflected in that, right? So again, I think this, so we started out with a very different mindset, right? With different aspirations, not about just getting the code out faster just to speed up the current method, right? It's really thinking about a different paradigm, right? How we can empower the different paradigm. And it was very interesting, right? I think a few of you, were also in one of the conference, right, 2 weeks ago. That was to, a lot of IT leaders, application leaders attended the conference. And in the conference, right, we also heard one of the key trend that's changing now is a lot of people talking about, now you cannot just look at the technology now, right? You got to look at the technology you adapt. You start pivoting to make sure that it's the technology, right, really being created with a software engineering minded, under, like you say, behind the core, right? And like you say, I would say that yes, when we set out to create AgilePoint, right, we have that software engineering minded, right, so that it led us to create this architecture, and this architecture now, as a matter of fact, so for all these early customers, right, they were able to now do a lot more, right? The complex process. If you think about it, simple process, the current development method creates a technical debt. It's a simple process, you can handle that. But when you get to complex, the levels of technical debt make it very difficult to manage, right? And that's why a lot of organizations cannot get to that. But the customers, early customer has been able to do that. But we are also very excited to see, right? We believe this is how with system development, right? This architecture is super, right, critical to be able to enable system development at scale.
I want to add a few points to that. I think Jesse was really, the idea of the paradigm shift was echoed in the experiences of the customers. The traditional way of, and I think there are kind of two aspects to this. The first is the traditional way of automating processes where the IT team has to gather the requirements from the business side, and then develop the applications, and then there's testing, and then there's releasing. Involving business users from the start, complete on the citizen development side, completely accelerates that process. And a second aspect to that was that the customers that had the longest and the most sophisticated implementations of AgilePoint ended up thinking not about the actual task of where can we see the highest value, what processes can we automate that will have the highest ROI on that automation, will save the most time, but rather how can we improve our process for developing processes, and they were releasing looking at how to scale their digital process automation, their digital transformation, and it was a paradigm shift. It was very, very meta, and looking at not just which processes, but or which automations, but how do we automating, and yeah, the paradigm shift was really, really. I think that's a really good way to describe it.
That's fascinating. I've noticed we've got 5 minutes. I've got so many questions for you because citizen development is a topic very, very close to my heart. I went down the rabbit hole almost a decade ago, and it's incredible to see where it's gone. But I think what's particularly highlighted in this report is, as you mentioned from the start, it's quite unusual to see customers who have stuck with the same platform for so long, right? So the longevity and the adaptability of the processes they've had, and the fact is they've had small team sizes, composed with citizen developers. I'm very curious, based on the conversations you had with the users, did you find that the way they governed it, was it intentionally a citizen development program, or was it something that almost came to fruit? It was more organic and driven by the grassroots. Was it top down, command and control, or bottom up?
It was actually both, and it varied from organizations. Some people empowered business users who were interested and had the inclination and wanted to go down that route, and then 2 of the organizations were looking more at the let's intentionally go this route. So it was really both in their experiences.
Fascinating. Thank you, Jeffrey. We do have a couple of questions. I see Paolo has asked a question not overly dissimilar to mine. Have you ever seen an ROI anywhere close to this number from a similar product? I think you kind of answered that, Jeffrey. I mean, Paolo, if I was to answer it, no, I haven't, which is why I asked the question too. Jeffrey, if you have any further thoughts on that, or do you feel you've answered that?
I would just add that the results are strong, but we do really encourage folks to think about and consider the study. Forrester has other research initiatives to compare those kinds of things, but this one is really trying to represent and relay the historical experiences of those customers.
Okay, thank you. And another question, would like to understand how the ROI was calculated. I believe that's actually covered in depth in the report.
Yeah, please check out the report. It's very difficult to go into the full model in a presentation like this, but we tried to be transparent and lay out every calculation. Would love to, I think that's the best way to follow up on that.
Sure. And actually, just to extend on that, Amin has asked a question. Would really like to know the method used to collect these data points from different representatives. I think the answer actually addresses that one as well. We have. Okay, go on. Sorry, Jeffrey.
Oh, they're in-depth, confidential interviews, and we do a lot of other data gathering, in which we're speaking with these customers, asking them to dig up their historical records and provide the kind of metrics in real time. And it's all guided by the Forrester team interviewing these different decision makers about their experiences.
Great. I think we have time for one last question, slightly curveball question. What was the experience with respect to integration with other IT systems? And perhaps actually even Jesse can shed some light on this.
Okay. So currently, when we enable customer to be able to create this end-to-end cross-functional right? So as it suggested that you're gonna have to integrate with a lot of different business functions, and business functions are supported by certain different specific systems. So in a way, right, we basically, so when it comes to integration, and I think a lot of people do is every system expose APIs, right? Let's write code, and somehow we can generate code, write code to stitch those APIs together. But with AgilePoint, right, we take those APIs of different systems. We support more than 100 of these most common, popular business systems, right? So the APIs get exposed to become visually drag and drop, visually drag and drop. So you actually do the integration. You actually do the integration visually, right, by being able to connect different systems. And this is actually quite different from the, from some of this current trend, right? Because look, we moving from the industry moving from the IT-centric development right now to become more IT and business collaborative development. What that means is we're gonna have to enable business to take part, right? Have that fusion team working together. And in this case here, it used to be when we come to do integration, right? We relying on maybe the certain API gateways or certain type of specific integration management platform only for IT, sits inside IT. So that paradigm are not going to be able to empower when we move into was a system development direction, right? So AgilePoint enables, right, in terms of each of the connector for different systems. We also, the same architecture, we abstracted that, right? So you're able to do that at the compositional level. Okay, so today we can come, like I say, we can connect to more than 100 of the most popular systems, right? Almost visually, but any other system without are not on the list can still be brought into the process, consume the API directly without going through the coding process. And again, I just want to emphasize that's a key to really enable. We're moving from the pure IT-centric development model to now become a collaborative development model between IT and business and IT for the for that fusion team.
Excellent note to finish on, Jesse. So it's all about enablement and empowerment of the domain specialists to be able to get their own work done. Okay, on that note, Jesse, I'd like to thank you for your time. Jeffrey, thank you once again. Fascinating report and a great presentation. Thank you everyone for attending and paying attention. Some great questions coming out. I think this call could have extended actually. Certainly, I didn't get all my questions out and then there are more coming in. But by all means, please do reach out. And if there are any further questions after you've looked at the report, we'll do our best to get them answered. But thank you all for your time and attention, and wish you have a great rest of the week and evening ahead, or day or morning, wherever you are. All the best. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.